All right.
Well,
Let's move
right
on.
now, the next thing of concern is what we encountered on the front page of the dailies yesterday was World Suicide Prevention Day. And information that's out there says that Nigeria has the highest suicidal rate in Nigeria. And that is really, really something that gives a lot of people concern. To discuss this and possible solutions, Dr. Olayinka Atilola joins us this morning. He's head of Department of Psychiatry, LASUCOM, and LASUTH in Ikeja. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's amazing that these figures are coming out, and I'm wondering, how does your industry receive and handle these kind of issues?
Well, thank you very much. When it comes to suicide, one of the first things I always want to say is that suicide is not just a single event. It can be seen as a process. So what I mean by that is that within the community, you have a spectrum of people who, starting from people that for reasons of some frustrations or the other are wishing to die. And we have another spectrum who are contemplating suicide, but they don't have any plan towards it. We have those who are not only contemplating, but they have a plan. And we have those who have actually engaged in a suicidal behavior. So this spectrum, what we tend to see in the hospital, unfortunately, are people who have already done a suicidal act, who were brought to the hospital for the care of the physical injuries or the physical manifestation of the suicidal act, during which time a psychiatrist is called to come and talk to the individual as part of the management.
Okay, but pardon me to button on this one. When do you say those who have carried out suicidal acts? Because what registers with a lot of people when they think about suicidal act, or those who may have tried it, is somebody hanging or standing somewhere trying to just jump off. Not many actually, because when we see these figures, chances are that we could gloss over them. But could you just tell us, what are these range of suicidal acts that are common that you've seen and handled?
Yes, that is what I was trying to explain, that it's a spectrum. And the reason why I'm talking about that spectrum is so that we can understand the enormity of the problem. So whenever the figures are released that this is the number of people that engage in suicidal acts in a country in a year, that represents a tip of the iceberg, in the sense that there's a large number of people who fall under the lower spectrum, which I've mentioned before, those who are contemplating the act and who have a plan for it. Somebody standing by the railings of a bridge has not only contemplated the act, is already having a plan, because that's why he's standing there. But there's somebody who is sitting in his office, who is in the marketplace, who is your neighbor, who is harboring a suicidal idea, doesn't have a plan, or who is wishing to die for reasons of frustration. It is within those group of people that those who will eventually engage in a suicidal act are extracted from. So many a times what we talk about is that those that require the biggest form of intervention, unfortunately, which is not an hospital-based intervention, but a community-based intervention, are those in those lower spectrum. Because if you see anybody who have engaged in a suicidal act, I can assure you that for several weeks or several months, that person may have moved from just having a wish to die to having a suicidal idea without planning, to having a plan and to executing it. So intervention is actually to break that pathway. But unfortunately, in practice, what we see, like I said often, are those who are brought to the hospital having completed a suicidal act, from which you are now invited to come and talk to the person. So you can only prevent a recurrence. You have not prevented the act from happening in the first place. So that's why one of the advocacy that we talk about is that there should be a comprehensive mental health system incorporated into primary health care level, where some of these issues can be identified before they escalate.
Okay, I mean, we'll talk about those measures, but when you talk about intervention, I mean, if you want to intervene or help at the community level, as you have said, you need to know how to even recognize that, you know, this person is at this point on the spectrum, this person is contemplating, this person has a plan, or so how do you really recognize what are the signs and symptoms? Because I hear depression, unhappiness, and then you hear there's even a difference between depression and unhappiness. Some other things are responsible. How do you recognize that this person has that tendency?
So, like I said earlier, human health is not something that occurs in isolation. So, when you go to churches, you go to mosque, you go to community program, you go to primary health centers, these are places where people congregate, where people talk about things that is happening to them. So, if you are able to integrate a system within some of these structures where people can assess for depression. I'll give you one example of one of the programs that we carried out in my own department, in which we try to integrate depression screening into... Okay.
You've talked about depression now. What stage is depression in the spectrum?
So depression is not on the spectrum. Depression just happens to be a risk factor for being on that spectrum in the first instance.
So at what point does the spectrum begin?
So like I said, the spectrum begins from having an ordinary wish to die or getting tired of life. Now, being tired
how
of
do you
life...
get, just one moment, because I'm trying to, this kind of education doesn't happen. Perhaps that is the reason that the figures rise, and as Jemelin said, we just gloss over them because we don't know that they are actually, serious issues. So there is a leading to the spectrum, right?
Yes.
Okay. What are the things that leads to that spectrum?
So, like I said, people experience different issues in life experiences. You are experiencing a traumatic event. You are experiencing, and again, traumatic event can be broadened to include things like as common as not just having enough resources to live your life, not being able to play the role that is expected of you within the society, facing different forms of adversity. We have different level of resilience when it comes to adversity. Some people handle adversities in terms of coping better. Some don't cope as good as others. So those who didn't cope well have a tendency to move into the early phase of depressive symptoms. It is within this early phase of depressive symptoms in some people that we may have some of these. And it's not only just depressive symptoms. If things are happening around, for instance, this whole COVID-19 and the uncertainties around it can bring up anxiety symptoms. And within anxiety symptoms, it can become burdensome enough for you to enter into that spectrum.
Now, you also talked about, we'll take a break shortly, but you also talked about mental health. You said we need a comprehensive mental health kind of program and all of that. It will be good for you to educate us if there is a spectrum on the mental health that usually leads to this spectrum of suicide that you talked about. But we'll take that on when we come from this break. Dr. Atilola, there are so many issues to raise and so little time, but very quickly, talk to us about the mental health state that leads to that spectrum that you talked about. Some have also alluded to the fact that anxiety is a level in that mental health spectrum that leads to this suicide that you're talking about.
Yes, I think a way of clarifying that is to first say that any mental health issue can put you on the suicidal spectrum. And it doesn't even have to be a diagnosable mental health issue like anxiety, depression. It could just be as simple as the fact that you are having relational issue within your family. It could be as simple as the fact that there are some challenges you are facing in your business. Every psychosocial issue that afflicts man can lead to entering into the suicidal. We've heard these statements people make loosely by saying, look, I'm just tired of everything. They are not necessarily depressed or having anxiety disorder, but they are facing a life situation that is exceeding their coping ability. So during that, when a life situation is exceeding your coping ability, you can enter to the suicidal spectrum. And like I said, it can just be as simple as wish to die. But then it can progress, and then before you know it, along that line, there can be a slide into practical suicidal behaviors.
In trying to raise awareness, so that we could all contribute to reducing those numbers. I mean, this scenario you mentioned, we hear it time and again. It could be on the streets, at workplace, social gathering, where people just say, oh, I'm just tired of this. And even those who say it don't necessarily at that point in time have any suicidal tendencies. What should we do when we hear people just say that kind of thing?
Well, thankfully, there are things that we have been doing correctly. Like I always tell people that when people face difficulties and they visit their friend, they talk about it. Some people just have a natural ability to talk to people, engage them, encourage them, provide support, call them. In other instances, we talk about people who go to visit their clergy, either their pastor or their imam. I will not underrate the amount of psychological support that many of these organizations are providing for people. What we are advocating is that people should be able to recognize the warning signs. When somebody starts talking about death recurrently, you may not want to continue your own lay counseling. That might be the point when you tell somebody that, don't you think you may benefit from some professional help? I've seen instances of people who have actually referred their friends, their families, and take over the bill of seeing someone because they just convince themselves that this person needs professional help. And when we see those people, we usually are very happy that as at the time when we were seeing them, we didn't see them at that point. They must have faced more difficulties.
There are tons of questions just rushing through my head as I listen to that. But, first, it's just as you have mentioned now. I mean, coming across some literature that tells you to, talk to one another. I think some holy books say confess your faults to one another. It's part of talking and hearing oneself out or each other out. From what you say, I glean that it could contribute to helping. But what do you do? Because given the way society is, if they hear that, well, I want to say a psychiatrist, you know how they will respond to me. So how should we, or what's your advice in terms of what we should be doing about this kind of issue? Because that stigmatization contributes to why people you won't hear anyone say, I think I need to just see a psychiatrist from having this kind of challenge. What should we be doing?
Yes, unfortunately, the practice of psychiatry has faced a lot of stigma, and it is an unfortunate situation in the sense that, like I always tell my patient, that when you are coming to come and see a psychiatrist, you are coming to come and see a doctor. You must first bear that in mind. The same way that somebody decided to be a cardiologist after becoming a doctor or become a gastroenterologist or something, it's the same way somebody decided to become a psychiatrist. And psychiatric consultations, usually wrongly depicted in the popular media and films, it's not exactly what people have seen. Psychiatric consultation is the same way you will consult with any other doctor. You sit on the other side of the table, you explain what you are going through, questions are asked, and formulations are made, and assistance are rendered. It's just something that simple. However, I believe that the conversation necessarily just have to go on, Because what I mean by conversation going on is that at the community level, we need to continue to demystify mental health services. Mental health constitutes a very significant part of our health. And like I always tell primary health physicians that up to about 20 to 40% of patients that you see in primary health centers actually come with a mental health complaint, except that sometimes it is not recognized. And so this is not a time, we have gone past the time when we are still discussing, oh, I have problem with seeing a psychiatrist, I have problem with seeing a psychologist and stuff like that. We have to get practical in the sense that this is a big issue. And with this COVID-19 era, I can assure you that the volume of mental health problem has actually quadrupled. I run clinics and I know the number of patients I used to see before and the number of patients that I'm seeing now. So
that's hearing that alone is quite troubling, honestly. And I was going through figures from SERPIN, that's Suicide Research Prevention Initiative, which partners with APN. And it was said that 1/5 of cases that are reported are usually people between 13 and 19 years old. It says that most of the callers that call in are between 20 and 39, basically saying young people are usually very affected. There are a lot of reasons, but I'm just thinking, is social media also maybe one of the risk factors? Is that even remotely involved?
Yes, well, the world is changing. And for every development in the world, it comes with its own mental health implications. The advent of social media has changed the landscape of the way we communicate and the way we reach each other. Before you can be bullied, you have to have physical contact before now. But today, you don't need to have a physical contact. You can be bullied by somebody who is 2,000 kilometers away from you. And also information that you are not, that is not available to you without some form of guidance can be available to you now without any form of guidance. We have also seen instances where people have discussed suicidal behavior in social media and people have taken a cue from it. But it's not all that, it's not all bad, because we have also seen instances, at least I've experienced that several times, that people have said something on social media that suggested that they may be going through some difficulties, and people have been able to pick the cue and use that medium to refer them. So at least I've seen, in this year alone, I've seen at least 4 or 5 people who were referred based on what they said on social media. So it has its pros and its cons, but certainly there are more cons on that side than the pros.
All right, so as we wind down now, tell us, is this prevalent among people with certain character traits? What would you consider as a low-hanging fruit that we should look out for in our bids to help out?
Well, there is a saying that majority of people who engage in suicidal behavior have told somebody before they do so. So the commonest thing is that we don't take people seriously when they say that. Just this weekend, I had a call from someone who sent a message to someone that, look, I want you to be the last person I will communicate with before I end it all. And I was glad that that person that received the message immediately alerted me, and we reached out to the young lady, and at least we were able to avert that. So take what people say seriously. Of course, there could be red herrings, but then you may not be able to differentiate between a red herring and the reality. So always take it seriously when people talk about how they feel, especially when it has suicidal component. And don't criticize, don't judge, just compassionately talk to them and also guide them to how they may be able to seek mental health services. And I think I may say that maybe everybody could read up about what we call the mental health first aid, because it's something that everybody can understand and know how to do, how to go about it with people that are experiencing mental health problems.
Okay.
You can all be some form of mental health practitioner in that level.
Okay.
Nice one.
Talk to parents for 30 seconds. That Kayode just mentioned, the young people. What should parents look out for? 30 seconds.
For young people?
Yes.
Well, the young age is a very vulnerable age. And I think I will tell parents that just the same way I've talked about to the general public, they need to take whatever their adolescent is saying seriously. Not everything can be explained by, oh, it's just being an adolescent. Sometimes, while adolescence is a very healthy period, but it comes with challenges that may not just be waved aside. So when your adolescent is expressing concerns or is saying things that is concerning to you, it is always appropriate if you try to get that adolescent to see someone. Adolescents talk to external people more than they talk with their own parents, because they sometimes feel that their parents will be judgmental. The kind of thing, I'm actually an adolescent mental health specialist, and the kind of thing that we've heard from adolescents, we know that they won't tell their parents.
All right then. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning, Dr. Olayinka Atilola, Head of Department of Psychiatry, LASUGOM and LASUTH. Thank you so much for your time and perspectives.
You're welcome.
One more thing, we'll be back.